The world today finds itself at the crossroads of energy transition, global power struggles, and the urgent quest for a sustainable future. In this unfolding drama, a new player has emerged with a voice that resonates far beyond the borders of his nation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso, has captured international attention once again by openly rejecting the clean energy financing framework championed by global financial figure Mark Carney. The declaration has sparked heated debates across Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas, raising fundamental questions about whether promises of clean energy and global transition funds are real solutions or cleverly packaged empty deals that serve powerful interests rather than the developing world. To fully understand the gravity of Traoré's rejection, one must begin by examining the promise that was placed on the table. Carney, former Bank of England governor and now a leading advocate of climate finance, has been pushing an ambitious plan to redirect trillions of dollars into green energy projects. His proposal, often framed under the umbrella of global carbon markets and energy transition funds, promises developing nations access to much-needed investment in renewable energy, sustainable infrastructure, and climate resilience. For struggling economies across Africa, where energy poverty remains a daily obstacle, such an offer would appear to be a golden ticket toward modernization, industrialization, and inclusion in the clean energy future. Yet Traoré did not see a golden ticket. Instead, he saw a trap. His rejection was not simply a dismissal of financing, but a direct challenge to the underlying structure of global clean energy commitments. According to Traoré, these plans are not designed with Africa's true needs in mind. They come with conditions that bind developing nations to cycles of dependency, limit their policy autonomy, and reinforce the control of powerful Western institutions over Africa's natural resources. The central concern, as Traoré articulated, is whether Africa is being offered genuine partnership or merely another form of disguised neocolonialism under the banner of climate change and sustainability. The clean energy debate cannot be divorced from the history of how Africa has been positioned in the global economy. For decades, the continent has supplied the raw materials that powered industrial revolutions elsewhere, from uranium and gold to cobalt and oil. And now, as the world transitions to green technologies, Africa once again finds itself at the heart of the supply chain, holding critical reserves of lithium, cobalt, rare earth minerals, and vast solar potential. Traoré argues that Africa must not repeat the mistakes of the past. Instead of exporting raw materials cheaply while importing finished technologies at exorbitant prices, African nations must use this moment to build local industries, retain value, and exercise sovereignty over their own resources. The tension at the heart of the dispute lies in the design of climate finance mechanisms. Carney's plan, along with those backed by Western governments and multinational corporations, often emphasizes carbon credits, offset schemes, and structured investment models that demand adherence to international financial standards. But, to many African leaders, these standards look suspiciously like new forms of control. They dictate how funds can be used, limit domestic decision-making, and prioritize returns for investors over long-term development goals for recipient nations. Traoré's rejection, therefore, is not a simple refusal of money, but a broader critique of a global system that he perceives as tilted against Africa's independence. What makes his stance so significant is that Traoré is not speaking in isolation. Across the continent, a new generation of leaders and activists are voicing similar concerns. They argue that Africa cannot afford to be passive in the global energy transition. Instead of being dictated to by Western institutions, African nations must chart their own course, investing in renewable energy on their own terms, building regional cooperation, and demanding that partnerships with foreign powers are based on equity and mutual respect. In this regard, Traoré's rejection can be seen as both symbolic and practical. Symbolic in that it represents a broader awakening of African resistance to external domination. Practical in that it forces a reassessment of how global climate finance frameworks must be restructured to truly meet the needs of developing nations. The global response to Traoré's announcement has been swift and divided. Western media outlets portray his stance as short-sighted, warning that rejecting such financing risks, leaving Burkina Faso and other African nations behind in the race toward modernization. Analysts in Washington, London, and Brussels argue that without foreign capital, Africa will struggle to meet its energy needs, risking both climate vulnerability and economic stagnation. Yet, on the ground in Africa, the reaction has been strikingly different. Many citizens, scholars, and policymakers see Traoré's words as an act of courage, a rare refusal to bow to global pressure and an affirmation of Africa's right to determine its own destiny. One cannot ignore the economic realities that underlie the debate. Burkina Faso, like many African nations, faces severe infrastructure gaps. Access to electricity remains limited in rural areas. Industrial capacity is constrained, and dependence on foreign aid continues to be high. Against this backdrop, a $100 billion climate fund or a green investment partnership may seem irresistible. Yet Traoré insists that the real issue is not simply money, but control. Who decides how these funds are allocated? Who owns the resulting infrastructure, and who benefits from the long-term revenues? If the answer always circles back to foreign investors and multinational corporations, then the promise of clean energy risks becoming little more than another chapter in Africa's long history of exploitation. The clean energy transition is often framed as a universal good, but in practice it is deeply political. For nations like Burkina Faso, the decision is not only about adopting solar or wind projects, but also about safeguarding sovereignty, maintaining policy flexibility, and ensuring that development is truly people-centered. Traoré's rejection reflects a deeper skepticism toward global initiatives that claim to be inclusive but often reproduce the very inequalities they claim to solve. By speaking out, he has forced a conversation that goes beyond Burkina Faso, challenging the world to reconsider how justice and fairness can be embedded into the global green transition. Another dimension of the debate is the geopolitical competition surrounding clean energy. As the West pushes its financing frameworks, other powers such as China, Russia, and even emerging players like India and Turkey are offering alternative partnerships. These partnerships, while not without their own complexities, often come with fewer conditionalities and sometimes prioritize infrastructure development that aligns more closely with African priorities. Traoré's rejection of Carney's plan, therefore, may also be a strategic signal that Burkina Faso is looking toward alternative alliances, seeking partners who are willing to respect African sovereignty in tangible ways. The symbolism of rejecting a deal presented by a global financial authority is immense. It signals to the world that Africa is no longer willing to be treated as a passive recipient, but demands recognition as a full actor in shaping the global agenda. In many ways, this stance echoes earlier struggles for independence, but with a 21st century twist. Instead of colonial armies and administrations, the new struggle is against financial systems, investment frameworks, and climate policies that appear progressive on the surface but preserve old hierarchies underneath. The question that follows naturally is whether Traoré's rejection represents a calculated risk or a bold visionary move. Critics may argue that Burkina Faso cannot afford to alienate potential sources of capital. Supporters, however, counter that sovereignty and dignity cannot be measured in dollars. By refusing the deal, Traoré has not closed the door to clean energy, but has insisted that it must be pursued in a way that places African interests at the center rather than at the margins. What this means for the broader global debate is significant. The success or failure of the global clean energy transition will depend not only on technological innovation or financial flows, but also on political legitimacy. If the transition is seen as another mechanism for rich nations to dictate terms to the poor, it risks losing credibility and sparking resistance. Traoré's words highlight that legitimacy cannot be assumed. It must be earned through genuine partnerships, respect for sovereignty, and equitable sharing of benefits. In reflecting on this moment, one is reminded that history often turns on symbolic acts of resistance. Traoré's rejection may not immediately change the balance of global climate finance, but it adds weight to a growing chorus of voices demanding reform. It draws attention to the contradictions of a system that promises sustainability while perpetuating dependency. It challenges the world to ask whether clean energy is truly a shared project or whether it remains a game dominated by powerful players with hidden agendas. In the final analysis, the truth behind clean energy promises lies in their implementation. If they serve to empower local communities, build resilient economies, and enhance sovereignty, then they represent genuine progress. But if they are structured to extract profits, centralize control, and reinforce dependency, then they are indeed empty deals, regardless of the size of the financial commitments. Traoré's rejection, therefore, is more than a political statement. It is an invitation to reimagine what a just and inclusive energy transition could look like. The world is watching closely, and the question remains open. Will the promises of clean energy truly deliver liberation, or will they merely dress old patterns of exploitation in new green clothing? Traoré has made his position clear, and in doing so, he has forced the international community to confront a truth it often avoids. The future of clean energy will not be determined by financial plans in distant boardrooms, but by the courage of leaders and nations who dare to demand fairness on their own terms.